Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're diving into some really fascinating stuff today. It's all about cultures and how they shape us.
Yeah, we're going way deeper than just, those surface level differences like what food people eat or the clothes they wear.
Right, it's about those like core values and beliefs, the stuff that really makes a culture tick.
Exactly. And we've got some pretty interesting source material for this deep dive, a collection of notes and essays.
And they approach this whole culture thing through a really unique lens. It's like a blend of philosophy and history.
Yeah, and one of the main arguments they make is that these cultural attributes, the values we kind of inherit from our cultures, can actually influence our destinies.
Whoa. Okay, so like our culture could be like a blueprint for our lives. That's a pretty bold idea.
It is. And the source material really dives into it. They even talk about this idea of strong versus weak cultures.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break that down for me. What makes a culture strong in their view?
So they define a strong culture as one that aligns with objective truth and natural laws. It emphasizes self-reliance and resilience.
Gotcha. So like taking responsibility for your actions and your outcomes.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that your choices have consequences and that you have the power to shape your own life.
Okay, so if that's strong, then what's a weak culture look like?
Well, according to the source, weak cultures tend to look for external saviors. They try to find loopholes and shortcuts.
So instead of facing problems head on, they're looking for an easy way out.
Yeah, and they often attribute their outcomes to fate or luck instead of taking ownership.
Interesting. Okay, to illustrate this whole strong culture idea, the source material talks about Fan Zhongyan, a historical figure in China.
Oh yeah, Fan Zhongyan, he was known for his unwavering commitment to serving the people. Like he never let personal emotions or desires get in the way of doing what he believed was right.
Wow, that sounds like some serious discipline.
It was, and it
Right.
really exemplifies those strong culture principles that focus on duty and selflessness.
So he was putting the needs of others above his own ego. That's pretty powerful.
It is, and it shows how deeply ingrained cultural values can really shape a person's life. How they approach their purpose and their impact on the world.
Okay, but how much do these cultural attributes really influence our individual destinies? I mean, isn't there still room for personal choice?
That's where it gets really interesting. To illustrate this point, the source material uses a fascinating historical comparison.
Oh, lay it on me, I'm hooked.
They compare the fates of two military figures, Sulu and Lin Biao.
Okay, and why are they so interesting?
Well, these two guys served under the same commander, but their lives took wildly different paths. One achieved incredible success, while the other's life ended in tragedy.
Whoa, so what happened? What made the difference?
That's the million-dollar question. The source material actually doesn't give us all the answers. They just kind of hint at it.
They're leaving us hanging, come on.
Yeah, kind of. But it's like they're challenging us to do our own research, to dig into Chinese traditional culture and see if we can spot those subtle influences that might have shaped these two men's destinies.
All right, challenge accepted. I'm adding that to my to-do list, but let's bring this concept a little closer to home. For now, the source material mentions this thing called market culture, which they categorize as a weak culture.
Right. Market culture, as they describe it, prioritizes immediate gains over everything else. It's all about short-term thinking, constantly chasing profit.
So it's like that get rich quick mentality, always looking for the next big score without thinking about the long-term consequences.
Exactly. And the source material suggests that this kind of thinking can actually trap us in a cycle of short-term gains that ultimately lead to long-term instability.
Wait, so you're saying that our own culture might be pushing us to make bad decisions? How do we break free from that?
Well, they propose a pretty radical shift in how we think. They say we need to move from what they call formal logic to dialectical logic.
Okay. Those sound like some pretty heavy philosophy terms. Can you break it down for me? Like, what's the difference?
Sure. So think of formal logic as like a really rigid way of thinking. It's all about, following the rules, sticking to established structures.
So it's like a very black and white worldview.
Exactly. But dialectical logic is way more fluid.
Mm.
It recognizes that the world's constantly changing, full of contradictions.
So it's less about finding like the right answer and more about understanding the nuances.
You got it. And the source argues that societies that embrace this kind of dialectical thinking, especially in their social and political spheres, they tend to be more powerful and adaptable.
Yeah, and they give some pretty compelling examples too, right? Like ancient China during the Warring States period and the rise of modern Germany.
Right? Those were periods of massive change and upheaval. But instead of just like clinging to rigid ideologies, those societies embraced debate and innovation.
So they were willing to challenge the status quo, even if it meant like rocking the boat a bit.
Exactly. And the source material makes this really bold claim that strong culture actually helps people anticipate trends and make better decisions. It's like having a secret weapon for success.
Okay, but hold on a sec. Are we saying that people who are born into a weak culture are just doomed? Like there's no hope for them?
Not at all. And that's what I find so empowering about this source material. It emphasizes that we're not just victims of our cultural programming, we have the capacity to change.
So how do we do that? Where do we even begin?
Well, the source uses this example of Chen Sheng and Wu Guang. They were leaders of a peasant uprising in ancient China.
Okay, and what's their story?
So they were born into this system that was designed to keep them down, but they dared to challenge those structures.
So they embody that idea of breaking free, refusing to be defined by their circumstances?
Exactly. Their story shows us that it's possible to challenge those deeply ingrained cultural norms and create a new path for ourselves.
That's inspiring. But let's be realistic. Can we really escape the influence of weak culture in today's world? I mean, with all the pressure to consume, the constant bombardment of information?
The source raises that exact question. It asks, can a return to a simpler agrarian society be the answer? And they acknowledge that a complete global shift back to agrarianism is pretty unlikely.
Yeah, we're not all going to become farmers overnight.
But they do suggest that those pockets of agrarian societies that still exist, within our information-driven world, they face unique challenges.
Like what kind of challenges?
Well, they use the example of the economic struggles in Northeast China. It's a region that went through rapid industrialization, but now it faces difficulties adapting to the information age.
So it's like they're caught between two worlds, the old ways and the new ways.
Exactly. And that struggle to adapt can create a lot of tension and uncertainty.
Okay, so even if we can't completely escape weak culture, maybe there's a way to navigate it, to find a path forward.
That's what the source material seems to be suggesting. It offers this glimmer of hope even in the face of these challenges.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's their solution?
They draw inspiration from a character named Ding Yuanying from a TV show called The Way of Heaven. Ding Yuanying believes that true empowerment isn't about relying on external saviors, or hoping for favors. It's about developing inner strength.
So it's about taking ownership of your own life, making your own choices.
Exactly. It's about understanding that you have the power to shape your own destiny.
Wow, this is all so much to process. It's making me rethink everything I thought I knew about culture and personal responsibility.
It definitely challenges a lot of conventional wisdom. What's been standing out to you the most from our conversation so far?
I think what's hitting me hardest is this idea that our cultural attributes can have such a profound impact on our lives. It makes me wonder if I'm unconsciously following a script based on my own cultural background.
That's a really insightful observation. And it brings us to a crucial point. Becoming aware of our cultural attributes is the first step towards taking control.
So we're not just passive recipients of these cultural influences. We have the power to challenge and reshape them.
Absolutely. The source emphasizes that this awareness is key to breaking free.
This brings up something that I found both interesting and a little confusing. The source states that women exemplify formal logic and can be obstacles to dialectical logic. What do you make of that?
That statement definitely requires some careful consideration. It's important to approach it within the context of the source's overall argument and to acknowledge that there may be some biases informing this perspective.
It seems like they might be drawing a connection between traditional gender roles and these different modes of thinking, but they don't really go into detail.
Right. And it's crucial to avoid making sweeping generalizations or perpetuating harmful stereotypes. I think it's more helpful to focus on the broader message about the importance of embracing dialectical thinking to thrive in our complex world.
Speaking of complexity, the source also cautions against oversimplifying cultures as simply strong or weak.
That's a really important point. The reality is much more nuanced. Cultures are constantly evolving, and they often contain elements of both strength and weakness.
We also need to remember that the source material draws heavily on Chinese cultural and historical examples.
That's true. It would be interesting to explore how these concepts apply to other cultures and contexts as well.
Yeah, for sure. It's clear that these sources offer a valuable framework for thinking about cultural influences, but it's up to us to engage with these ideas critically and apply them thoughtfully to our own lives.
Exactly. The real value lies not in blindly accepting every assertion, but in using these concepts as tools for self-reflection and growth.
This deep dive has definitely given me a lot to ponder. I'm especially curious about how my own cultural attributes might be shaping my decisions and outlook on life.
That's a fantastic question to reflect on. Are there any specific decisions or patterns in your life that you think might be influenced by your cultural background?
Now that you mention it, I'm realizing that my emphasis on hard work and self-reliance, it might stem from my family's immigrant experience. It's made me who I am, but I also wonder if it sometimes keeps me from asking for help or collaborating with others.
That's a really insightful observation. It highlights how cultural influences can be both empowering and limiting. The key is to become aware of those influences so we can make conscious choices about which ones to embrace and which ones to challenge.
The source also makes us ask ourselves if we're playing by the rules of a strong culture or unknowingly caught in the patterns of a weak culture.
That's a question worth asking ourselves honestly and regularly. Are we taking responsibility for our own lives? Are we embracing challenges and seeking growth? Or are we hoping for shortcuts and external solutions?
These aren't easy questions to answer, but they're crucial if we want to understand ourselves and the forces that shape our lives.
And the answers might surprise us. We might discover that we're more influenced by cultural patterns than we realize. But that awareness is the first step towards making more conscious choices and shaping our own destinies.
Man, this deep dive has been quite the journey. We've covered so much ground from strong and weak cultures to how those cultural attributes can actually shape our destinies. We even got into some deep philosophical territory with ideas like formal and dialectical logic. My brain's still buzzing.
It's definitely a lot to take in. But I think the most empowering takeaway is this. We're not just products of our cultural programming. You know, we actually have the power to examine those influences and make conscious choices.
Right. And that makes me think back to those Chinese military leaders we talked about, Sulu and Lin Biao. They served together, but their lives ended up so different. The source material kind of hinted that their cultural backgrounds might hold the key to understanding why.
Yeah, it's a really powerful example of how those subtle cultural forces can play out in real lives. The source didn't give us all the answers, but it definitely challenged us to do our own research, to see if we can spot those cultural influences ourselves.
I love that. It's like a bonus challenge for our listeners. But to be honest, not everyone has time to become a scholar of Chinese history. So what's the key takeaway for the average person?
I think it boils down to this. Self-awareness is power. The more we understand how our cultural background is shaping our decisions, the more control we have over our lives.
Yeah, it's like shining a spotlight on those unconscious biases and assumptions we all carry around.
Exactly. And that awareness, it gives us the freedom to choose,
Yeah.
which cultural influences to embrace and which ones to challenge.
Speaking of challenges, the source material also brought up this idea of market culture as a weak culture. They argued that it focuses too much on short-term gains and not enough on long-term stability. Does that resonate with you at all?
Absolutely. I mean, think about how much of modern life is geared towards instant gratification. We're constantly bombarded with messages telling us to buy now, consume more, chase the next shiny object. It's
Well,
easy to get caught up in that cycle.
it's almost like market culture is tricking us into making decisions that aren't really in our best interests, in the long run.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. And the source material argues that this constant focus on immediate gratification, it can really hinder our ability to make sound long-term decisions.
So how do we break free from that market culture mentality? I mean, it's like it's woven into the fabric of modern society.
Well, the source material offers a pretty interesting solution. They suggest shifting our thinking from formal logic to dialectical logic.
Okay, to be honest, those terms still sound a little a little intimidating to me. Can you remind me what they mean again?
Sure. So think of formal logic as that really rigid rule-based way of thinking. It's all about sticking to established categories and applying rules consistently. But dialectical logic is different. It embraces change and contradictions and the fluidity of reality.
So it's more about adapting to the complexities of the world instead of trying to force everything into neat little boxes.
Exactly. And the source argues that strong cultures, they tend to embrace this kind of dialectical thinking. It's
Mhm.
about being open to new information, challenging assumptions, and recognizing that things are rarely black and white.
Okay, but how do we cultivate that kind of thinking in our own lives? It's not like we can just flip a switch.
You're right. It takes practice and intention. One way to start is to simply become more aware of our own thought patterns.
Mm.
When we notice ourselves clinging to rigid beliefs or falling into black and white thinking, we can pause and ask ourselves, is there another perspective here?
Yeah, like training our brains to be more flexible and open-minded.
Exactly. And the source material really emphasizes how important this kind of cognitive flexibility is,
Mm.
for navigating the complexities of the modern world.
And they also highlight the story of Shen Sheng and Wu Guang. Remember those peasant leaders in ancient China who dared to challenge the system. It's a good reminder that we're not powerless in the face of cultural forces.
Oh yeah, their story is incredibly inspiring. It shows us that even those deeply ingrained cultural norms can be challenged and changed.
But the source material also raises some really tough questions, like can we really escape the pitfalls of weak culture in today's information age? They seemed especially concerned about those pockets of agrarian societies that are struggling to adapt to the modern world.
Yeah, they use the example of those economic struggles in Northeast China.
Mhm.
That region that's caught between its industrial past and the demands of the information age. It really highlights how challenging it can be to navigate these rapid cultural and economic shifts.
So what's the solution? How do we find that balance?
Well, the source material leaves us with some wise words from that character Ding Yuanying from the TV show The Way of Heaven. Remember, he said that the true empowerment, it's not about relying on external saviors or shortcuts. It's about cultivating inner strength and self-reliance.
It's about taking ownership of our own lives, making conscious choices, and being accountable for the consequences.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we have the power to shape our own destinies, even within the constraints of our cultural programming.
This deep dive has been such a thought-provoking journey. I'm walking away with a new sense of awareness and a real determination to look at my own cultural influences more critically.
That's fantastic. And remember, the journey doesn't end here. This is just the beginning of a lifelong exploration. Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep pushing yourself to grow.
And that's a wrap on this deep dive, folks. Thanks for joining us.
See you next time.